the impact this has on China's global ambitions is economist and public policy analyst Michael Busler, professor of finance, Stockton University. Good afternoon, Michael. So President Trump has said that losing the dollar's global reserve status will be like losing a world war. To start off, what are your thoughts on that?
So when countries trade between and among other countries, about 60% of the transactions are done using US dollars, even if the US is not involved with these transactions. The reason is that the US dollar is the most stable of all worldwide currencies. Now, China, they're looking to have their currency as this worldwide currency. Their currency, the YUAN, I think that's pronounced the yuan, I'm not sure. They want that to be the worldwide currencies. They formed what they call BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. There's about 10 nations that are a party to that, and they're looking to have the Chinese currency used rather than the US currency. It would be very disastrous, I think, for the world and for the US. Why? The Chinese currency is not nearly as stable as the US currency. And in the past, when China has had some problems, they've devalued their currency. Now, if they go ahead and do that, and that's the standard that countries are using, it's going to make everything that they're trying to sell more expensive. It would create, I believe, a lot of instability in the world. And I think we're much better off sticking with the US currency, and that's what Trump is trying to do, and make sure it doesn't happen that anything is changed.
So you were saying that it would be disastrous if the US dollar stopped being the reserve currency. So can you talk to us about exactly what is required for a currency to be the reserve currency? You need to have the rule of law, for example.
Yeah, and primarily that countries will accept it and decide to trade in that currency rather than the US dollar. Because of the instability, now China says they want their currency to be the worldwide currency, but again, with the instability that they have, it will cause a lot of trading disruptions. If the value of their currency changes, either because of market conditions or they devalue, that upsets all of the price system. In other words, if something was 100 of their dollars and they devalue, and suddenly something costs 110 of their dollars, that's going to create chaos worldwide. So I think it's very important that we maintain the US dollar as the worldwide currency.
Is there any threat on the horizon? For example, is there a threat from BRICS to the US dollar?
So far, I don't think so. There were originally 6 nations as part of BRICS. I think they're up to 10 nations now. China is very large. Brazil is part of it, and their economy is very large. Saudi Arabia said they're willing to join, although they still use the US dollar as their currency. So I think as long as people realize that the US is the most stable nation and that we don't have any intentions of trying to overrun any country or expand our reach beyond trying to protect US interests, I think countries will stay with the US dollar, especially if the American economy starts taking off the way it looks like it will. And when Trump gets these trade agreements, and he just signed 3 of them, Japan, Philippines, I can't recall the 3rd country, but he just signed 3 more. They'll all want to continue trading in US dollars. So it will benefit those countries to stay with us, and switching over to something else will end up causing them more harm than good.
So, Michael, we've talked about a lot on the issue of debt on this program, and I know your stance on debt. So is the amount of debt that the U.S. has, is that putting pressure on the dollar as a reserve status? Could it erode confidence in the dollar, having so much approaching, soon probably $40 trillion?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, it certainly could. And that's why that it's so important that we get, first of all, the annual deficit down as close as we can to balancing the budget, and then sometime in the future start to work at paying down some of that debt. The danger is if the debt is too large and interest payments, which are now approaching $1 trillion annually, if that continues to grow, it will put pressure on the US dollar worldwide. Then there's the fear, will the US default on their debt? And if they default on their debt, then which will be disastrous for the country. I don't think the government would ever allow that to happen. But if even the hint of that is occurring, people will lose confidence in the dollar. The reason the dollar is the reserve currency is that people have confidence in the dollar and confidence in the stability of the American economy. So getting that debt down is very important. You may want to note that last month, primarily due to President Trump's effort to reduce government spending and increase tax revenue, mainly from the tariffs, we eliminated the debt last month. And in fact, we had a slight surplus in the budget. I'm not sure that's going to go on for any time in the future, but that's what Trump is trying to do. And as we do that, as we come closer to balancing the budget and perhaps running a surplus, there will be more confidence in the US dollar, and it will then be harder for a country to leave the US as a reserve currency and try to go somewhere else.
So on the topic of confidence, let me know if these other things could erode confidence. For example, tariffs, sanctions, weaponizing the dollar, kicking people off the SWIFT system. Could any of those, sort of put countries, push them away from the U.S. and more toward other countries' financial systems?
Well, those are only things that the U.S. will do if another country is behaving badly, like Russia. President Trump has been trying to bring peace to the Russian and Ukraine war, and Russia, on the telephone calls, he says, okay, these are good calls, we're on our way. And then later the same day, they'll start bombing the Ukraine even worse. President Trump has said a couple of days ago, I'm going to give Russia 50 days to come up with a peace agreement. If they don't, then I'm going to start to apply very harsh but necessary actions. Now, they gave Iran 60 days to come up with an agreement. Iran didn't do it. On the 61st day, the U.S. took very aggressive actions. So if Russia doesn't come up with an agreement within 50 days, President Trump will put on very severe sanctions on Russia. I don't know if he'll refrain them from using the SWIFT system, which would completely eliminate virtually any Russian trade, but that is something he may consider. I don't think the rest of the world will lose confidence in the US dollar because they see the purpose of these sanctions that the president is putting on is to achieve peace. And it's not for any gain necessarily for the US, any economic gain, other than we'd like to see fewer people being killed every day and the world at peace. So I don't think using sanctions here, or if we use them against Iran, which is also a possibility, because while they've said they want to negotiate with us, they say we absolutely must enrich uranium. President Trump has said there's no way we're going to allow you to enrich uranium. So if the U.S. and Iran doesn't come up with an agreement, President Trump will put very harsh sanctions, even more so than we have now on Iran. That should force Iran to the bargaining table, and you hope it forces Russia to the bargaining table. I don't think the rest of the world will lose confidence in the U.S. dollar because President Trump is trying to use these economic policies to achieve peace.
Okay, Michael, just one last thing. We've seen some energy exporters using non-dollar denominated oil transactions. I think it happened last year. Should we be worried about that?
It isn't a good thing for the U.S., but I don't think it will be done in large enough amounts to cause any issues. I think Saudi Arabia even traded in something that was non-dollars at one time. But President Trump has very good relationships with most countries. We're working out trade deals, and he goes to these countries and speaks to the leaders. He wants to continue to show confidence that in the U.S. dollar, and he wants to develop very peaceful relationships really with everybody. Remember in his first term, he had these Abraham Accords, and we started to get peace in the Middle East. We're going back to a lot of that. And once he starts getting more peace agreements, I think people will say, well, I mean, countries will say, well, look, the U.S. is doing these things for good reason. I don't think they'll have any faith in the dollar, and they'll be encouraged to continue to trade in dollars.
Okay, Michael, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, Bryan Kohberger, the confessed killer of 4 universities.